We hope you enjoy this episode of the Modern Divorce Podcast. But first, an important message for our listeners.
Hi, this is attorney Billie Tarascio, and my partner Julie and I have created a resource for you if you are representing yourself in family court. No one should go into family court without knowing the basics, and we will teach you everything you need to know at Win Without Law School to represent yourself with confidence. We'll teach you how to get exhibits in, how to draft your pretrial statements, and how to speak to the judge so the judge will listen. We'll teach you how to defend against false accusations and everything you need to know to be an effective advocate, both if you're negotiating or if you're presenting evidence. Don't wait. Go to winwithoutlawschool.com. We can help you.
Hello, and welcome to this special edition of the Modern Divorce Podcast, where I am joined by Gilbert Mayoral candidate Shane Krauser. Shane, thank you for being here.
Billy, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I'm glad. I hope you think it's a pleasure when we're done, because Gilbert's in rough shape and there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. No question about it.
So before we get into before we even talk about the Goons or the Gilbert government, let's talk about your background. You are an attorney. You were a prosecutor of gangs specifically. Is that correct?
Yeah. So right out of law school, I began my work with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. I was there for 12 years and I spent some time in the gang unit. And while in the gang unit, I was one of two prosecutors designated to handle homicides. And so capital qualified, so handled a number of really nasty cases involving gang violence. And then I transitioned out of there and was a partner with the Tempe-based firm for 2 years. And I retired about 10 years ago to focus on other things that I'm really passionate about, just having impact on the culture and wanting to leave my country better than I found it. And about a year ago, decided I was going to run for mayor. And that's quite an interesting story in and of itself.
Okay. All right. So before we move on, one of the things that I was sort of tipped off to was that the prosecutors that are currently assigned to the Christopher Fantastic and Eris Arredondo cases are not gang prosecutors. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to that at all?
I can speak to it a bit. Of course, I'm not sitting where they're sitting. I'm not analyzing what it is that's been placed in front of them. I'm not reviewing videos. I don't have access to the anything that may have been done in terms of acquiring evidence to prove gang membership. And so I think at this point, you probably have some charging attorneys, at least that initially are reviewing it to see, hey, where are we at on this? Is there any indicia of gang membership? And if there is, at that point, it would likely be passed on to a gang prosecutor to review. That's one route that possibly could be going on. Another route that could be going on is you do have gang prosecutors involved right now that are offering advice along the way, but an individual that's primarily responsible in the charging unit to oversee the evidence that's generally been gathered up to this point and making some preliminary decisions. So I wouldn't say that it's out of the ordinary that you don't have a gang prosecutor looking at this, at least initially, because evidence my understanding has been submitted and will continue to be submitted. And you're going to have a lot of questions in that process, especially given this whole idea that the Gilbert Goons is at best a low-level street gang, at best. And so with that being said, you want to be very careful about designating a group like this as a gang and just be sure you have all your ducks in a row. So just as an outsider looking in, I think, these people know what they're doing. And I don't think that they're sidestepping the gang issue. They want to make the right decisions up front and are looking at what they've in front of them right now.
Okay, so let's take a minute here. So you said at best they're a street gang definition, and we've known that they've been investigating that, and we've talked about that definition. Are there other types of gangs, higher designations?
No.
Oh,
no. So under Arizona statute, you have a criminal street gang, and that can apply to things as sophisticated as the mafia, criminal syndicates, and low-level street gangs like what we're seeing here. And so the statute outlines 7 criteria for gang membership. And what the prosecution has to prove is that they've met at least 2 of those indicators of the 7. And if they can prove that two of those indicators have been met. Now they have to jump to the next obstacle, which is in the commission of whatever crime they're being prosecuted for, was that committed to advance the objectives of the street gang? Because remember, Billy, it's not illegal to be a member of a street gang. It's not illegal. What's illegal is what you do with that membership. And if in the process of being affiliated with the gang, you are committing felony crimes to advance the objectives of the gang, that's when it becomes very serious. And when I say serious, you're talking about significant enhancements to any sentencing that might be passed on down to the defendant because of their gang membership.
Okay, so it's interesting you say that. Are you tracking the civil complaints that have been recently filed?
I have seen, so have I heard of it? Yes. Am I deeply entrenched in what's happening? No, but I know there's a civil conspiracy charge or a civil conspiracy suit that's being brought against the parents of various suspects.
Right. And so the basis for that theory is essentially that if you are if you are a group and you have a illegal intent, an illegal unjust purpose, then any act by any one member, everyone is guilty for, which seems to contradict a little bit what you had said about if you're, just being a member isn't illegal, but under a conspiracy theory, isn't it?
So you have the civil suit on the one hand, and then you have criminal conspiracy on the other hand. And so there's no criminal, at least not at this point, we don't have any conspiracy on the criminal side that's being alleged.
Right.
So just looking at the criminal side with regard to gang membership, you have to prove what's different than the civil suit is on the criminal side, you have to prove that a felony crime was committed in furtherance of the gang itself. Whereas this civil conspiracy, you have parents that are being implicated, right? So there's no necessary allegation of a crime necessarily that's been committed, just that the individuals conspired in the process to do certain things in the community. And so what those things look like, I'm not certain, but I'm certain we're going to see these things unfold very, very shortly.
Right.
So I can give you an example of on the criminal side of how this would unfold.
Sure.
Okay, so I want you to imagine, let's just use brass knuckles as an example. If I were to hit Joe and I were to hit him with my fist, that would be an assault misdemeanor. That essentially would amount to a slap on the hand. Misdemeanors carries up to 6 months in jail. Now, if I were to hit Joe while wearing brass knuckles, in Arizona, that would carry a sentence of 5 to 15 years. It's a mandatory minimum of 5 years because those brass knuckles would be considered a dangerous instrument. Now, if it can be proven that I hit Joe with brass knuckles in order to further a gang objective, there are now significant enhancements that come along because aggravated assault with a dangerous instrument, in this case being brass knuckles, is a class 3 felony. But because I did it in furtherance of some gang objective, a minimum of 5 years is added on to the minimum sentence. So in this case, I would be doing a minimum of 10 years with a maximum of 20 years. So when I say that gang enhancements are significant, there's no joke. You're talking in this case, at least on the minimum side, almost a doubling of the sentence because the act was committed in furtherance of a gang objective. And gang objectives can be any number of things. It can be an initiation. It can be, hey, domination of a territory or a neighborhood. And this is what we do. We dominate the neighborhood. We intimidate individuals, and individuals that come into our neighborhood, we have an agreement that we're going to stand our ground. But here's the interesting thing, Billy, is that you do not have to even be a member of the street gang to be charged in the furtherance of a street gang. Let me just give you an example. This is where it gets really interesting with the Gilbert Goons. You could have some sort of informal association among individuals in the town of Gilbert, young individuals, 17 to 25 years old. And they have this informal agreement about what it is that they're doing. And one night you're at a party and an individual that's not affiliated with this group becomes friendly with them and says, hey, let's go beat this kid down. And so in that process of beating down, you have an outsider join that group. And now you have an individual that had no formal or even informal association now being looked at for being charged as a street gang member for purposes of that charge. In fact, that's what the Arizona statute says, is that it can be a member of the only one individual in the commission of the felony charge has to be a gang member. And if you have other individuals that are not a part of that, so long as they are involved in furthering some objective brought to the table by the gang member, all individuals can be charged and sentences can be enhanced under the gang enhancement statutes.
Okay. We could talk about this topic forever. There's so much to talk about here, but I do want to get some more background on you. So, most recently, have you been self-employed?
So for the last 10 years, I've been an entrepreneur.
Okay.
And so what I've been doing is a lot of speaking and writing since about 2014. Speaking and writing, I've traveled all over the United States, up into Canada, down into Latin America. I've written 2 books on the Constitution, rule of law, freedom. And so I do a lot of that. In addition to the 2 books, I've written a lot of writing, but a lot of speaking as well. So I'm out speaking even before I was running for mayor, 4 to 5 nights a week to various groups here in throughout Arizona, but then also being asked to travel throughout the country and speak to various groups. So political groups, grassroots organizations, college campuses, and junior high school and high school groups.
Okay. And when you are speaking, are you speaking and promoting a specific political agenda, or is it educational?
It's educational. So
Okay.
my big focus has always been politics is downstream from culture. And so I've been heavily involved in, I want to shift the culture. I want to get people to think differently about what the American experiment ultimately is. What does it mean to be free? Why do we have rules such as the Constitution? What's the benefit of that? And what does society look like when you don't have a rule book that government has to follow? So, for example, when I go into a high school auditorium and meet with these students, I'll do things that are relevant to them. I'll just give you an example. I'll talk to them a little bit about, I'll bring a student up and I'll say, hey, listen, I want you to imagine after school, you're driving home and you get pulled over by the police and they ask you for your license and registration, which you offer, but then they ask you to search your car and they give you no reason. They just say, do you mind if we search the car? What would you say? And surprisingly, a lot of students will say, no, I'm not going to do that. And what is fascinating about a discussion like that, this is one of many examples I'll bring up with the students, is they'll begin to argue and have this intense conversation with one another to the point where the teachers now get involved. You know, on the one side, they're saying, well, what do you have to hide? And on the other side, they'll say, well, I don't have anything to hide. So I'm going to go ahead and let them search. Or, hey, I have a privacy right. I should be able to decide who comes in, especially if the government has not met their burden of proof to be able to go into a car. And so that is a great opportunity to help them understand, you know what you all are debating? You are debating the Fourth Amendment. Well, what's that? What you're debating? See, rules are important. Rules in our society are important, and we want government to have rules because historically, when government doesn't have rules, what happens? Tyranny advances. Individuals are oppressed. Basic freedoms that every human being should be able to enjoy are gone. And so these are the types of things that I'll do in a junior high school or a high school auditorium. When I go out to political groups or grassroots organizations, I'm talking about fundamental principles that supersede politics. Things like everybody wants to be left alone. Everybody believes that government should follow the rules. And you and I should be able to keep the fruits of our labor. Those are core principles that bring people together. It's not about a Republican or Democrat. And quite frankly, Billy, this is why I enjoy doing this, because it's not going out and being a front for any organization, for any political group. It's about what principles bring us together. Because I often say I'm an equal opportunity hater. It doesn't matter to me if you have an R or a D behind your name. It doesn't matter. The question is, are the rules being followed? And is freedom being protected in that process? So those are the kinds of things that I've been speaking about for the pretty intensely over the last decade. And it's been a pleasure to even go outside of the country to work with groups.
Okay. All right. So the position of mayor specifically, is it a part-time or a full-time job?
So there is no parameters necessarily for how much an individual will put into this, but as a general rule, people see this as a full-time position.
Okay.
That you're down at the office, you're down at town hall, you're working with the town manager, you're working with businesses in the community doing ribbon cuttings, and you're being a watchdog essentially for the various things that are going on in the community itself. So I see it as very much a full-time position.
Okay. What does the position pay?
Right now, it's about $50,000 a year.
Okay. It's definitely an act of service.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So and you are a Republican, is that correct?
I'm a registered Republican.
Okay. All right. What do you think of the current state of the Gilbert government, specifically the town council?
Yeah, so I think I'm concerned about the direction that Gilbert's going. And anytime you're concerned about the direction that a town is going, it always comes back to leadership. And so, one of the things that I'm hearing, and just to give you some background, I have my own perspective, but I also have my ear to the ground. So I announced in January of 2023, and I've done over 100 engagements in that year period. So I'm out speaking a lot. I'm doing a lot of meet and greets. I'm meeting with various groups, and I'm listening to them. Of course, they're hearing a little bit about my perspective on what some of the things that are going on that I'm concerned about, but I'm also listening to them. And there is certainly many, many concerns about where we're going and about where we stand with leadership. And I think at the end of the day, what we're really looking for is that the individuals that we elect to actually run the government. That's what I'm hearing. That's a common thread through the various meetings that I've done over the last year. We just want individuals who are elected to run the government. So the town manager, he's not an elected official. He's brought to the table because he brings a certain skill set, but he's not directly accountable to people. The police chief is not an elected official. The town attorney is not an elected official. And I think sometimes the perception is, and I think to a degree it's an accurate perception, that oftentimes individuals on the council are rubber stamping whatever is put in front of them. And as a result, we're not really analyzing deeply the things that are coming across the desk of the council, or I should say, maybe better stated, the individuals on the council are not analyzing deeply the things that are coming across their desk. And I think there's many examples that we can look to illustrate that. But I am concerned about the direction. And I think this election is going to be very simple for the voters. If you like the direction that Gilbert's going, you do not want me as your mayor. You don't need me as your mayor. But if you are discontent about the direction, it's a pretty easy choice, because my opponent is a great human being. He's a phenomenal human being. I think every single individual sitting on the town council is an excellent human being. They're doing the best that they can with what they know how. But I bring a different governing philosophy to the table, and that has resonated with the people over the last year as I've spoken about it.
So as far as I can tell, as far as what I've read, there has been deep division within Gilbert Town Council for a long time. There's a lot of turnover. There is not a lot of civility. Have you been attending the city council meetings?
Yeah, over the last year, I've attended every council meeting with the exception of one.
Okay.
So I've seen much of what you're talking about, Billie, unfold.
So my first city council meeting was January of this year. And it was awful. The behavior of the council members was awful. And I specifically saw members of the council treat the mayor incredibly disrespectfully, which and criticism may be warranted, but disrespect is not. And I also watched the women of the council get railroaded by the men on the council. And I have since gotten many, many reports from people alleging misogyny within Gilbert government. And you, I believe, are LDS. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So can you address this issue of misogyny in government of Gilbert?
I mean, Billie, you're speaking my language in terms of what it is that's going on, because I'll just take the mayor. Mayor Peterson, she's been on the council for a long time. And I think she's done some things incredibly well. One of the things that she's done very well is the way that she runs those council meetings. She's got it down like clockwork. She does a very good job of running an agenda and understanding the rules, those sorts of things. Another thing that she does very well is her connection with business owners within the community. These ribbon cuttings, I know people oftentimes will make fun. Well, there she goes doing another ribbon cutting. Wait a second. If you're serious about supporting businesses here, ribbon cuttings are incredibly important. That a member of the council is there and celebrating with that business as they open up or do another grand opening. Those things are important. And I think where things have gotten sideways is there's been political differences. And as there's been political differences, unfortunately, it's become very personal. And my belief is this: you can hit hard, you can disagree. I spoke at a recent town council meeting, and I told the mayor that I disagreed with her. And we can hit hard. As an attorney, being a trial lawyer, you can hit hard, but still be respectful in that process. And I think there is an element of respect that is missing. And I think that's reflected in this idea that there's been constant ethics complaints going back and forth, which is odd. When you look historically at the town of Gilbert, we can look at various phases of the council where there was drastic philosophical disagreements, but no one ever filed an ethics complaint. You just recognize I bring a different viewpoint to the table, and I might be in the minority here, and I'm going to speak my piece, and I'm going to try and rally individuals to the cause, the community, number one, and number two, individuals on the council. But this will not become personal. And this has become personal. So I think, Billy, to answer your question, one of the concerns that I heard an individual talk about, I think it was at the same council meeting that you attended, was the teen violence subcommittee.
Right.
Where the three, it was Scott Anderson, Chuck Bongiovanni, and Jim Torgeson had said, hey, we'll take the lead on this.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, at that council meeting you're referring to, the concern was, well, wait a second. Bobby Buckley brings value to the table. There are other women that bring value to the table. So in fairness, what had happened was you have to have three individuals on the council. So there's two ways to get things on the agenda. One way to get something on the agenda to be contemplated by the council is the mayor can put anything on the agenda that she wants to. If she's not putting something on the agenda, you can have three members say, hey, we would like to have this on the agenda. So what happened, in fairness, in this particular case involving the subcommittee, was Scott Anderson, Chuck Bongiovanni, and Jim Torgeson said, we want to put this on the committee. Mm-hmm. So there had certainly been some discussion about what they looked like, what that looked like, and that they wanted to take leadership here. And I don't know that there was any intention. The optics certainly doesn't look good. I agree with you, Billy. The optics doesn't look good. But I don't know if in that situation, the intent was necessarily to keep women out. But I think if they could go back and do it over, it makes sense that you would have a woman on the subcommittee that's going to be out in the community, holding forums, collecting information. You would want a woman to have input in that process, and that certainly is missing.
I mean, personally, I think a subcommittee is stupid. I think every single member of the council should be actively involved in what is arguably one of the most important issues facing Gilbert today. And I think it was a political move to look good. And at least when I watched it, it didn't look good. What I saw was Kathy Tilkey say, yes, I'd like to be on it, but I'm not going to because there's already three people. And Bobby Buckley say, I would like to help, but I can't. And the mayor said nothing because she'd already been personally attacked throughout the meeting. It was, in my opinion, just disgusting. And I'm a family law attorney. So what I saw was essentially mom and dad fighting, screaming at one another in front of the kids. Like, we're the kids. We don't need to see it. We need you to act like adults. And it just was so offensive to me. And these people are still going to be on the council. Like, if you get elected, you have to work with these people. How are you going to unite this group of people that is so dysfunctional?
So Billy, if I could just address one thing that you said, and then I want to answer that question. When you said that it's political, I do not disagree with you. In fact, the forum that they held, last week, maybe a week and a half ago, the forum that they held, one of the suggestions was around, for example, a brass knuckle ban. And I think the way that they addressed that, I have to tell you, I disagree with this idea of a brass knuckle ban. It does nothing. And I gave the illustration a little bit earlier in our conversation about a class 1 misdemeanor because you're in possession of a brass knuckle. That we already have significant enhancements, but you didn't have anybody on the council that was knowledgeable on that issue that could speak to the community. Because if I had been in that position, I certainly wouldn't have voted to endorse this SB 11, I think 85, which basically was saying, hey, we support the Arizona legislature pushing this through. But I would have explained, listen, I'm with you, but Let's focus our energy in some other places, because I think we've got this issue that you're concerned about locked down. Now we just have to have prosecutors do their job. We have to have law enforcement do their job, because these individuals that did this to this young man, I think his name is Connor, they should be going to prison for a long time if the law is appropriately applied. So that's one issue. I thought that was just playing politics to make it appear as though, hey, we're doing something, when in reality, it would do nothing. From a prosecutor's perspective, it does nothing. So how do you get a dysfunctional group together to start to cooperate? Well, one of the things, Billy, that I'm very passionate about, and I think you've heard a little bit of my content, is I'm an individual that's front and center. I'm out speaking. I'm running a very atypical campaign at the local level. Normally, these kinds of campaigns revolve around signs. Hey, it's 2 months before the election. Let's go aggressive on our sign campaign. I've chosen not to do that, because, as I've said over and over and over, I would rather lose this election on a battle of ideas than win it on a sign campaign. I want individuals to know when they go to the ballot box, this is what I stand for. This is the way I will govern. And if you align with that method of governance, I'm your guy. And so I've been very open about that. So the bully pulpit is important, and the bully pulpit is not being used. And by the way, I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just mean the mayor has a microphone. The mayor has the ability to mobilize people to a cause.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the reasons why the mayor is getting trampled on, and we're having all of this dysfunction, is because you don't have someone front and center that's leading. You don't have someone that's front and center that's using the microphone to cast a vision for here's where we're going. I'm a big believer in, if you're going to govern, you have to tell people where you're going, and it's got to be a positive vision. My mantra is our best days are ahead. You got to talk about where you're going, but then you got to say, we've got issues to resolve, and here's how I intend to resolve these issues. So I think just the individuals that I do know on the council, I think they know me well enough to know that I'm interested in engaging in a battle of ideas, but I'm interested in doing it in a very respectful way. And that's missing. And no one should be bullied on that council in the advocacy of various ideas. No one should be using the media to go after individuals like, hey, here's a piece of information. Can you publish this? I mean, there's been some of those allegations.
Yes.
So childish. That's not what these individuals are elected to do. And I think I just bring experience as an attorney that's been involved in the battle. I've been involved in intense battles in the courtroom, intense conversations with attorneys where we fundamentally disagreed, but we were friendly in that process. We respected one another, and that's drastically missing. And I don't know where we lost our way as adults on a town council where we can't do those things. The only thing I can put my finger on is, well, someone disagrees with you politically, so I'm going to do everything I can to make life difficult for you. That's just so silly that we've gone down the road. So I'm an individual that, theoretically I could go in where I don't think this will happen, but could it happen? Where I go in and I'm the minority view, right? The things that I'm advancing, the ideas I have are in the minority view. I think one thing that I do very well is build consensus around my ideas. I love talking about my ideas, and I love talking about the logic behind various ideas, which quite frankly, I think is missing on a lot of the discussions happening within the council. They throw out a position, but they're not asking the right questions, and they're not talking about the logic that leads them to that conclusion. And as a result, it just looks like one person against another person instead of one idea versus another idea. And let's have a battle on what idea is best for this community. So I'm a consensus builder, and I'm willing to have intense conversations, but I think people that know me know that I'll be very respectful in that process.
So one of my questions was, how are you going to operate in an environment of misogyny?
Mhm.
If that is happening, and it looks like it might be, I don't know.
Yep.
And I think your answer was, I'm going to build consensus.
Well, no, well, in addition to that, right to the issue of misogyny, I can tell you, Billy, that will not be tolerated on my watch.
Okay. How so?
And so when I talk about will not be tolerated, I'm talking about an equal application of the law in general in terms of how it impacts the community. But that same concept applies to the individuals that I'm governing with. That you're not looking at sexual orientation. You're not looking at race. You're not looking at religious affiliation. Those things should be irrelevant when it comes to governing, and it should be irrelevant when you're talking about the individuals in the community. And so how do you deal with an issue of misogyny? You become very vocal about this idea that when it's seen, and identified, that you make it clear that this will not be tolerated. And I think I have a history of making it clear, standing, for the little guy, fighting for justice. That's my background. That's what I've done. And I have no hesitation and no fear in calling individuals out that, hey, this isn't appropriate and this isn't going to happen on our watch. And so I think that's what we need, is leadership that is courageous in knocking that sort of thing down.
Okay. I also want to talk about the brass knuckles ban for a minute, because we disagree.
Okay.
I don't see any possible place in our society for brass knuckles. I see zero possibilities that you're threatened with a fight, but wait, let me go get my brass knuckles so I can defend myself. That is absolutely fundamentally illogical to me. So tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah. So when you talk about anytime you have government now deciding whether something is useful or not, that's a recipe for disaster. And so to say that there's no useful need for this, martial artist, what do they do with Chinese stars? Is there a useful need for a Chinese star? I think the general public would say, yeah, there's probably no useful need for it. And would we say that there's a useful need for brass knuckles? I think the masses would say, oh, there's no useful need for it. But individuals possess these things as a function of their craft and of their art. And so we don't ban hammers or knives or brass knuckles. What we do is we go after their inappropriate use. And Arizona has excellent laws on the books to make sure that individuals that use these things inappropriately pay severe consequences. I mean, the ban, listen, criminals don't pay attention to these bans. To suggest that these thugs are now going to pay attention to a misdemeanor ban is folly, right?
Well,
So that's where I'm coming from. That what you do is you penalize the illegitimate use when they're using to hurt other human beings. We have significant enhancements in place to hammer these people.
Sure.
That is more of a deterrent, knowing that you're going to spend a minimum of 5 years in prison than possibly get a slap on the hand if you're found in possession.
It's not a deterrent because it's been used consistently and inappropriately. And if we take Adam Zodrov as an example, that was a Desert Ridge assault with brass knuckles where a kiddo lost 7 teeth, and he pled down and he didn't get the enhancement. So that's one issue. They are being used ineffectively, even though laws are in the place to use these enhancements. It's not happening. And then the second point is, if possession is illegal, cops show up, fights done, people leave, and a witness says that person has brass knuckles, they use them, the cops can go, they might have probable cause to search a car, and they can say, look, you have brass knuckles. That in and of itself is now a crime that didn't exist before.
So to suggest that an individual is not going to commit a crime with brass knuckles because there's a misdemeanor ban.
That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that the possession in and of itself would be a new crime.
Mm-hmm. And so again, going back to, so you're talking about a few isolated incidents, which you and I both sympathize with. I'm not suggesting that anybody should walk. What I'm suggesting is that individuals should pay severe consequences. Now, if prosecutors didn't go after the full enhancements that were available and they pled that down, well, that's on the prosecution. But we clearly have laws on the books that say if an individual uses an instrument like this, the mandatory minimum is 5 years. And so I'm suggesting that you and I may not agree that there's something useful about these things, but what about individuals that commit crimes with hammers? What about individuals that commit crimes with knives? What about individuals that commit crimes with baseball bats? What we've historically done in the criminal arena is that we punish individuals when they use any instrument in a way that could cause serious physical injury or death. And all I'm suggesting, Billy, is that I think by explaining, I was involved in a community forum a week ago, and I had explained this to some of the families, and they said, I had no idea. I had no idea that these enhancements were available. They'd never been taught, and you don't expect them to necessarily know. But I was able to explain, just as a former prosecutor, this is aggravated assault with a dangerous instrument. Do you understand that there's mandatory prison? And of course, they don't know this because many of these people have not been charged. And so they're still waiting around for these things to come down the pipe. So, but hey, we agree to disagree on this. I just think that we've got things in place to really hit these individuals hard. And as a former gang prosecutor, we did those things all the time and sent folks to prison for a long, long time for inappropriately using various tools.
Yeah, I understand. And I think this is a great example of, you know, not everybody's going to agree on certain things, and it's okay.
Right.
Okay, I want to know, if you were mayor today, how would you have handled the Gilbert Goons, Preston Lord situation differently?
So initially, this is several months ago, as concerns started to come out and we were made aware that things were going on, I would have immediately called a press conference.
Mm-hmm.
And at that press conference, I would have been saddled by the town manager, the police chief, and the town attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have sent a very clear message that your concerns are our concerns. We are cognizant of what's happening, and you should rest assured we are going to use every resources that we have available to us to investigate, arrest, prosecute, and convict these individuals. At the same time, I would have sent a very clear message to the criminal that go elsewhere to commit crime, because if you come here, you will pay consequences. Now, some folks might look at something like that and say, yeah, there's not a microphone you don't love. But that's not the issue here. The issue is leadership
Right.
is standing strong and saying, I understand your concerns because I'm concerned about this. I have children that run the streets here. I have children that work in this community. I have children that go to school here. We're not going to tolerate criminal activity here. And so that would have been one of the first things. And that would have happened months ago, but it would have been, we would have had multiple press conferences in the meantime, because the public has a right to know. Now, I know one of the concerns is, well, wait a second, you can't talk about, these cases because you'll jeopardize their investigations. I don't know who's advising these folks.
Right.
But the rule is this: you cannot give information, and you know this, Billy, you're an attorney. You cannot give information that would taint the jury pool. You can give information in terms of status of investigation. Arrest has been made. These are the resources we are utilizing. These are the policy changes that we've made adjustments on in advancement of the concerns that we have in the community. I just think this type of leadership is so critical in a community that's relatively safe, that has been disrupted by this kind of chaos. This is when leadership speaks. And I mean, just by hearing about the town council meetings and attending the council meetings, this is one of the concerns of the community. And this is, I've had my ear to the ground now for many, many months on this crime issue. And that's one of the most commonly asked questions of me when I go into these homes and do these meet and greets. Shane, what would you do differently? And that's one of the first things I would do differently. Another thing that I would be doing is, even though my job is not the police chief, I'm not the police chief, I can work with the police chief to get information in terms of, hey, what can be done more effectively? Because as someone who's going to be speaking on behalf of what's going on in the town, along with the police chief, I need to have information and maybe even offering some ideas. I think that's the value of having someone that has a law enforcement background to sit as a mayor, especially during this time when crime is the number one issue. And so another thing I would do is making sure that the department has all the resources necessary. And this is critically important because we're not used to this sort of thing.
No.
But you look at our neighboring town of Queen Creek, they had their first homicide, right? And they brought in, the FBI to come in and help, because I don't know that they had a lot of experience. We're starting to experience some things in our community that if we don't have the resources and we don't have the best of the best investigating these things, they will continue to happen. These crimes will continue to happen. And so it's making sure that we've got the right officer training, detectives that are investigating these things. Are they properly trained? Are we bringing in the best officers from here on out? Are we hiring the best of the best to come in, as we need to fortify and make sure this sort of nonsense stays out of our town? And do we have the resources that those officers and detectives can now utilize to combat these hot spots of crime? So those are a few things that I would have done differently, or that I would do.
Certainly, communication is a massive opportunity for the town of
Yes.
Gilbert. Massive, massive opportunity. Low barrier to get better at
Yes.
communicating. But
Yes.
many of us feel upset by the way that Gilbert PD has handled specific investigations. And more information comes out that just suggests they did not meet our standards. As citizens of Gilbert, our expectations are that crimes get investigated uniformly, no matter who you are, and that those people are arrested and then charges are submitted or people are charged. And that hasn't happened. And the council's position from day one has been, we support our police. And I feel like that was kind of a slap in the face to constituents.
Yeah, no question about it. I felt the same way. And it goes back to the comment that I made a little bit earlier. The police chief is not an elected official. Town manager is not an elected official. They're accountable to the council. The council is supposed to be running the show. And what would be refreshing, Billy, is just to hear just acknowledgement that we dropped the ball here.
Right.
That would get,
Right.
we would establish so much credibility. You would have the chief and the council would have fans overnight. Individual, man, they're acknowledging that mistakes were made here, because there's no question
Right.
that certain investigations were swept under the rug. There's no question.
Absolutely. There's no
Because
question.
after this Preston Lord case, and everyone's becoming very upset, and rightfully so, suddenly 4 investigations are reopened. What magically happened in that time frame to have those cases reopened? It was public pressure. And I know of at least 2 cases that aren't related to violent crime, but are related to a string of burglaries, where police department was given information and the investigation was simply dropped. And so my concern is the sophistication of some of these cases. Man, that we have to allocate more time. And I'm not suggesting that officers or detectives are inherently lazy. But listen, my primary duties as a prosecutor was handling gang crimes out of South Phoenix and Maryvale. Right? These are hot spots. You had the best of the best of the best working in these areas, that they were willing to, there was no stone left unturned, because that was their job and they were very good at it. And so one of the things I want to do as the mayor is work with the police chief to make sure, do we have individuals that are prepared to investigate crimes to that degree? The people deserve it.
Right.
I mean, listen, if you're going to have government embrace the law enforcement function, we deserve nothing less than to ensure that our taxpayer dollars are going to investigate these various crimes, whether it means fingerprinting a door that's been burglarized, or a car door that's been burglarized. Well, we're never going to catch. Who are you to say? Why don't we do our job and we'll figure that out later, whether or not we can put 2 and 2 together. But it's just, I think sometimes officers and detectives may be jumping to conclusions that, based on what we're seeing superficially, oh, this can't be solved. And now this public pressure is mounting. We're like, well, we better do something. So there has been, been positives that have come about, but I am, like you, I am deeply concerned about how many other cases were swept under the rug. Are there domestic violence cases that were swept under the rug? Are there these theft and burglary cases? Are there rape cases? We don't know. We don't know, but I'm concerned if you have some of these issues that we do know about being swept under the rug, there's probably more.
So what is the way that gets solved? It does
accountability.
The police, right. Does
I'm
that mean
sorry.
the police chief needs to be fired? What does that mean?
I have never met with the police chief.
Mhm.
Chief Solberg. I've never met with him. Of course, I followed him. I listened to him. I have met with Patrick Banger. I met with him a few weeks ago and talked with him. And it was a great meeting. And I shared with him some of my concerns about what's going on with regard to crime. But listen, I know what my philosophy is in terms of law enforcement. And I think I bring a lot of experience to the table. And if I saw that we were dropping the ball, that may be a conversation that we entertain with the council. Of course, the mayor doesn't get to decide who the police chief is. You have to have 4 votes, right, in order to replace the police chief, the town attorney, or the town manager. So I think there's a lot of people that are upset about what's happened, and that pressure may continue to mount to the point where the council, even before I arrive in office, makes some decisions about where they go. But I know that the town manager and the town council very much like Chief Solberg. And I think it's one thing to like an individual. It's another thing to say, you know what, maybe it is time to move on. We've had issues come up, and is there complacency now within the department? And if there is, maybe it is time to make a change. But I'm not suggesting that that's what I would necessarily do. But I would have intense conversations once I do arrive to decide whether or not I want to make a case for a replacement.
Who and how should the police be investigated to determine what happened? Because it's one of two options. It's either corruption or it's incompetence. Those are the only two options. And
That's right.
either way, we have to figure out what it is so that we can figure out how to address it, whether it's resources or training or bad apples or whatever it is. So who does this investigation?
Yeah. So number one, you can have a council beginning to inquire. You can have independent investigations put together to find out what's going on. Because on the one hand, you want to look at metrics. Why are we seeing increases in crime in certain areas? Have we dropped the ball in terms of numbers of officers designated to these areas, or have we dropped the ball in terms of the investigations not even happening once the investigation at least initially begins? So you have the inception of the investigation, and then nothing else happens. There's no follow through, and so there are metrics that can be identified in terms of calls that are being made into the department. Like, this is a comprehensive investigation where we can identify calls being made and what happened with each of those investigations. And then there's the issue of corruption, because I know one of the concerns is, this is about rich LDS kids that have it. They have these connections with those in government, and as a result of those connections, they're being corrected or they're being protected. I will tell you this, Billy, that I don't, this is not my game. I do not play that game where, because you're a part of a certain religious group or because you're a member of a prominent family, that you're somehow protected. That is absolutely antithetical to the rule of law. The rule of law says equal application under the law. The government doesn't pick winners and losers. If you committed a crime, you pay the price. Your last name doesn't matter. Your religious affiliation doesn't matter. None of that matters. And so if there is corruption, in terms of protecting individuals to this degree, some individuals are going to be, there's going to be heavy sanctions that potentially come their way, including criminal sanctions that could potentially come their way, because now you're hindering prosecutions and maybe other things that are involved. I don't know, because I'm not in a position to begin asking those questions to the point where I can get results right now and demand. But you do have a council right now that could be taking steps in that direction. And I've heard nothing at a council meeting over the last year that tells me that that's something that they're interested in looking at. I think they're just assuming everything is A-okay.
Oh yeah, they've been crystal clear. We stand by our police.
Right.
But when you say that crystal clear, unequivocally, you're saying I refuse to look at anything that would be necessary to protect the public. And it's a slap in the face.
Yep.
And I think you're entirely right. This is not the only reason that we know it's not limited. This is not limited to these teens and these issues. I think you're exactly right. It's probably happening with domestic violence and with burglaries. I know it is, because people keep telling me about it.
Mm-hmm.
So they really, our police do need more support, more resources, more training. They don't have everything they need, for whatever reason, to effectuate the rule of law uniformly. The other thing is, the rule of law is never effectuated uniformly. There's discretion built at every single level. You know this as a prosecutor. We know this if we live in the real world. Like, that is a pipe dream.
Yeah. You do have discretion in terms of, how individuals are prosecuted, what crimes will be alleged. Do we have witnesses that are credible? Has this video been manipulated? Like, we law enforcement and those that prosecute those individuals that are referred for prosecution, they use their discretion all the time. Where discretion should not be utilized is, well, hey, this kid right here is a part of this family. And of course, you'll never hear that. But are there things going on behind closed doors? Because if they are going on behind closed doors, someone needs to have the courage to stop it, because it isn't appropriate. But I just want to be clear. Many people have asked me this question. Do you believe it's going on? I don't know if it's going on. I'm a prosecutor. I'm a former prosecutor. I'm an attorney like you. I want to have evidence in front of me that I can refute before I start casting aspersions directed to any particular family or any particular group. Now, is there indicators that parents are protecting their kids? Oh, of course, the evidence is overwhelming in that regard, that parents are protecting their children to a degree to avoid being held responsible. But that is different than saying law enforcement within the town of Gilbert is protecting these families. And because if that's the case, that's a big problem.
Right. And I don't think we'll ever know. But for instance, one of the members running for council, Buckland, what's his first name? Kevin? Is that right?
Not sure. So
Kenny Buckland, I
yes,
think.
yeah. I'm not sure of the last name, but yeah. I know
He's
there's 7 individuals running for council, and I'm familiar with a few of them.
he's running for council, and his grandson is heavily implicated in Gilbert Goons. I believe he's already been arrested. Oh yeah, he has been arrested. He's been arrested many times. And I honestly, I feel bad for Mr. Buckland because I don't have, I have no doubt he didn't have anything to do with his grandson's behavior, but
Yeah.
he served as police chief, police commander for Gilbert PD for 20 years.
Yeah.
So if you're a police officer and you go to arrest this guy's grandson, there is automatic. We're
Yeah.
human. We're
Yeah.
human. We're going to look at this guy's grandson and be like, "Oh, that really sucks. I really like that Buckland guy." There's nothing we can do about humans behaving like humans, right?
Yeah, that is true. And those are things, we don't avoid prosecuting these individuals, but these are factors that can be brought in to mitigate sentences. Talking about his family background, talking about resources that are available to help him rehabilitate. Right? Those are things that can go to really help the individual once he's prosecuted. Now we're looking at sentencing the individual. But you're right. I just, as one who prosecuted a lot of individuals, you'd occasionally come across a defendant and you'd read their background and say, man, he comes from a wonderful family. He had huge opportunities. And you start to read and you start to listen. He wants to make things right. He's not trying to escape accountability. And those things go to mitigate a sentence. And I think those are powerful things. But again, not going after an individual. I mean, I mentioned it already. It's a recipe for disaster. And you have individuals that get in a lot of trouble when they start picking and choosing who they're going to prosecute and not prosecute, when all things being equal, there's evidence to show that a crime was committed.
Right. It's a hard system. It's just a
Yes.
hard system.
Yeah.
I also want to ask you about, you mentioned accountability earlier. I know you have some shady stuff in your past. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, so I appreciate you asking me that. So in 2008, 2009, I got hit like a lot of people in the downside of the housing crisis. And I had borrowed money, about $150,000 from 3 different people, and I lost that money along with my own money. And I made it very clear that I intended to pay these people back. I mean, I'm still very good friends. One's my sister and one's a very good friend. I'm still very friendly and close with them. And because I had lost the money, I wasn't able to pay it back immediately, at least according to the timeline of the promissory notes, which everybody signed. And about 5 years later, a lawsuit was filed against me by the Corporation Commission. And by the time the suit had been completed, I'd paid about 75% of the money back. And to this day, everybody's been made whole. I suppose, the difficult part of this is, people of integrity expect to be believed. And when they don't, they let time prove them right. The sad part of this is that the document that's written about what happened was not issued by a court. It was written by the opposing attorney. And so having the opportunity to tell my side has been very enlightening for people. And by the way, Bobby, I've been very open about this. Or Billy, I'm sorry. I've been very open about this. I am not hiding behind this. In fact, I speak about this quite often at the events that I go to. And if this is an issue that, after hearing my explanation, that would cause you to distrust me to the degree where you could not vote for me, I understand. But what I'm asking for is a hearing. And I'm asking for people to listen to my side of the story. There was never, and there has been no finding that I acted intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, or negligently to defraud anybody. It's a strict liability civil violation. That's what happened. But as you look at what happened, where everybody signed promissory notes, I wasn't trying to hide anything.
Okay, so
Promissory notes. Yes.
can I ask some questions? Because
Oh, you bet. Yes.
okay, so what I read, and I don't know if it was from the bar or if it was a civil suit. Because
Civil.
okay,
Yes.
what is there also a consent decree with the bar?
Yes. That
Okay.
followed. Yes.
Okay, so there's two different basically okay, and the civil suit, was that from the regulatory department, the Arizona Department of Revenue?
No, that was from the Corporation Commission.
Corporation Commission. Okay. And so what it alleged was that you were acting as a investment advisor, a licensed investment advisor, right? And
Yes.
that you had gotten this money under the guise of, I'm going to invest this money for you and, manage your money as a trustee and fiduciary. Now, what you're telling me is different. What you're telling me is I entered into personal loans. So
Yes.
how,
So that was the promissory note. The promissory note was, I'm borrowing money and I intend to pay you back at a particular interest rate and within this time frame. That was
not that you were taking this money to invest on their behalf.
Yeah, so there were discussions about that. Like, remember, this is very close people, very close friends, and even a family member of mine having these types of discussions about what would ultimately happen. But in terms of the promissory note, it was making it clear, listen, on the promissory note, there's no guarantees about what I'm going to do. The only guarantee is I'm going to pay you back with interest. That was the assurance that they would be paid back with interest. And then ultimately I lost their money and I lost my own money that I had put in through a variety of investments. And so the Corporation Commission came back and concluded that those promissory notes were securities, right? So that's where the difference of opinion was, we took the position, this is a promissory note. We didn't do anything to hide the ball here. Everybody signed. And of course, the Corporation Commission came to a different conclusion that those were securities. And because I was using that money to invest, that there were different requirements that I needed to abide by in order to take that money. And I've accepted responsibility. I think this is a key, Billy, that individuals are about making it right. It's not so much about being perfect.
Mhm.
It's about operating with the information you have available to you. And at the time, could I go back, or do I wish I could go back and fix this? You bet. I absolutely do. But I operated on the best information I had available to me, and I made decisions. And now here we are, many, many years later, I've made it right. And I think, isn't that the kind of individual that we want, is someone that will own up to a mistake and said, you know what, I screwed up, but I made it right in the process. And that's what we need in government. That's what we want in all human beings.
Right.
And so do I agree with many of the characterizations as to who I am? I disagree adamantly about the picture that was painted of me. Adamantly. There are many things in there that if you don't tell the whole story, you're not telling the entire truth. And so there's been many things in there where I've been characterized where the entire story is not being told. And that's been the painful part for me. But how am I addressing this? I'm being open. I'm being vulnerable. I'm not running this on a sign campaign saying I'm going to hide in my house and just put signs up. I am out 3 to 5 nights a week in homes of people willing to address these issues. And I think when people hear the whole story about what happened, they're like, this guy's a human being, but he made it right. He made it right. Every single person's been paid back. It just didn't happen on the time frame that I would have liked it to have happened, because I lost everything. My life was turned upside down in significant ways, and their lives were too. But it's been made right.
I really appreciate you addressing that,
Well, thank you
because
for the opportunity.
I really do, because voters right now, we have two options. It's either you or it's Jim Anderson. And people might look at what was filed. I know I looked at it and was like, oh, is this the guy we want to have be our mayor? And it's awesome that you have the ability to address it, because there are two options. It's either you or Jim. And knowing the whole story and knowing that you are willing to come on and you are willing to talk about these things, you are willing to take a position, in my book, goes a long way.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've been on for an hour and I could keep going, but I'm not going to keep you. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I really sincerely appreciate it. And I appreciated the ability to get to know you a little bit more.
Billie, thank you so much for what you're doing. And it was a pleasure to be here with you.
Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Modern Divorce Podcast. Remember, anything you've heard today or anything you read online is not the replacement for actual consultation with an attorney and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Even if you called in and we spoke to you, you are anonymous and we don't have your details and you have not become a client of Modern Law. However, we would love to speak with you, or you should seek out the advice of legal counsel or counseling or any other expert near you. And if you have an idea for a show topic or you need to speak with an attorney in Arizona, you can reach me at info@mymodernlaw.com.